So we're at our final Tapas web novel for this set, and this time we're delving into classic fantasy. Not isekai fantasy, but classic fantasy with Dragon Tamer. So this one is particularly interesting because it was a member of Tapas's writing camp program. If you want to know more about that, Google it, but I'm not going to get into it here. But basically, this being said, this was one of several series working in a competition to try and get recognition on the site. It unfortunately didn't win said competition, but that doesn't mean the series itself is bad because it's actually fairly good. So let's start talking about the series itself. A long time ago, humanity warred with dragons, and it was a great and bloody war that humanity was losing. The one person who managed to stop the chaos was the Dragon Tamer, who tamed the Dragon King and created a land of peace and prosperity. However, once he died, out of his grief, the Dragon King continued the war, but thankfully humanity had the time to figure out a magic that would subjugate the dragons, thus creating the modern age of dragon riders. Then we cut to the modern day, and we meet a young girl named Destiny, who begins to have odd dreams of her own fiery death and demise. Destiny is your average girl, except for the fact that she can't really use magic at all. Because of this, her life isn't really so great. Her father ignores her, and her mother basically abuses her, treating her like a low-class servant. The only solace she has in her life are her older brother and her grandmother, who actually do care for her. However, one day after having the same nightmare again, her eyes turn an odd yellow and her destiny is revealed. She must go out and meet the Dragon King Ahmed and tame him, because she is the reincarnation of the Dragon Tamer, and it's her destiny to change the world. Unlike all the other works I've talked about so far, this one is actually quite well into itself, being a whopping 75 chapters. So there's a lot to go on into in terms of narrative if I want to spoil the crap out of things, but that's not really how we roll here, so let's actually get into the characters. First off, we have Destiny herself, and she's a pretty good main heroine. She's your standard put-upon fantasy heroine who comes from a crappy upbringing and standard of life, and then gets the call to, destiny, and slowly awakens to her own capabilities and abilities, such as being able to tame dragons without magic and stuff like that. But deep down, she's still your average girl who doesn't really know what she's doing and has to deal with a bunch of crap that's just suddenly put upon her. However, considering her home life, going out into the wild and dealing with dragons is a lot easier. Next, we have her loyal and loving older brother Axel, who's desperately trying to keep her safe while also being a bit of an overprotective type. But not so much that we can add in a sister complex joke. He's just a worrying older brother who cares deeply for his sister, especially considering her upbringing, in which no one gave a shit about her except for him and their grandmother. So it makes sense why he's so protective of her, all things considering. The group later adds on a new partner who joins them. Well, he starts off blackmailing the group in an effort to get food, but does join them willingly, named Max, who's basically the mysterious new guy who joins up with them for his own reasons. And they also have a horse called Spirit, who's a horse, so not really much to go into there. Overall, the whole group works well off of each other, with Destiny and her brother having a brother-sister dynamic, with him trying to protect her and her trying to just do her own thing while figuring out what's going on with herself, and Max basically being a bit of a wild card, and the horse being a horse. Destiny herself is a pretty well done main protagonist, and the world itself is pretty standard fantasy. The only thing that's really gone into in terms of how the world works is just the dragon taming stuff, and what makes Destiny different in terms of her not being able to use magic, but aside from that, it's pretty standard fantasy, with some surprisingly quick pacing once we're done with the opening chapters. It still leaves the series feeling a bit standard fantasy, but that kind of works for this thing. If you're down for some interesting fantasy stories, then I suggest you take a look at this one. The basic premise itself is interesting, and the main cast does have a good play off one another, so it's an enjoyable read even though it's not that deep. So if you're looking for a well-paced fantasy story that's kind of light on fluff, then I recommend you take this one. It's not super deep or violent, it's not genre changing, it plays the tropes pretty much standard, but it does work. So yeah, that's all you really need in a standard fantasy story.